Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Hibbler, CEO of North America for REF, and I am delighted to be leading and welcoming you to today's Expert Insights, future-proofing your business. Are you collectively agile or fragile? Our agility as a business, as organizations, and as leaders is being tested more than ever with accelerating disruptive change, which separates the agile from the fragile. Insights into the secrets of agility powered by collective intelligence, a peer-powered culture of agility may be the one and only competitive advantage. Everything else is increasingly temporary, increasingly quick, probably bigger, faster, and sooner than you think. To help us explore these concepts, I am delighted to be joined by Agile thought leader Mike Richardson. Mike is a career executive and CEO coach, facilitator, and board member, author and speaker who has been a thought leader in the field of agility powered by collective intelligence his whole career. From working on offshore and gas drilling rigs, to running technology companies, to coaching and facilitating hundreds of CEOs, executives, and their teams to resolve the patterns of collective agility and fragility, we are delighted that Mike is now part of the REF team, innovating the next era of collective intelligence and peer-powered cultures of agility. Mike, welcome.
Hey, yeah, it's great to be here, Kim. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad we were able to slow you down for a minute from all of your world travels to be in sunny California in your office.
Sure. Yeah.
Hey, we're going to jump right in. So you say that peer-powered culture of agility is the one and only competitive advantage we have, which has any degree of permanence these days. Everything else is increasingly temporary, increasingly quick. Let's start there. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I suspect everybody that faster, bigger, sooner than your worst nightmare, if you're not careful, you are about to be disrupted by this thing that you've probably heard more and more and more about called VUCA. VUCA is an acronym that came out of the US Army College in the 80s or 90s when we started dropping special forces behind enemy lines more and more and more. And we knew that we were going to be dropping them into a VUCA environment: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And we needed to give them the skills to not just survive, but thrive in an environment of VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And if you now go to the Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Entrepreneur Magazine, whatever your favorite, business website is, and you just go to that search field and you type in VUCA, V-U-C-A, you will be buried, because VUCA is now widely used in the commercial world to describe what we've been going through. I mean, think about it. We've barely emerged from a pandemic, straight into supply chain issues and a blockage of the Suez Canal, straight into inflation, market volatility, worries about the economy and a recession. Oh, yes, and a war in Ukraine. And that's just the start of the macroeconomic kind of VUCA. And then, of course, you have microeconomic and competitive and technological and talent VUCA in your backyard of your business and your industry. And so we just live in an accelerating VUCA world. And Kim, agility is the antidote to VUCA. And agility is the ability to adapt. Now, actually, mistakenly, people quote Charles Darwin. It actually wasn't him that said this. It was someone else commenting on his theory, but it's close enough. Said, it isn't the strongest who survive. It isn't the most intelligent who survive. It's the most adaptable to change. And so agility really is the ability to adapt to this accelerating VUCA world of disruptive change. And yeah, what I like to say, Kim, is, if everything that you think is your competitive advantage, if you're not careful, it's probably going to be disrupted by VUCA, bigger, faster, sooner than you think. And really, when you
already has been.
Exactly. If it hasn't been already, like, last year, last month, last quarter, last month, last week, yesterday. I mean, back in the 80s and the 90s, we could kind of rely upon the fact that, if our business model is working this year, it'll probably work next year. It'll probably work for 3 to 5 years. 5 to 10, maybe 10 to 15. Maybe our business model will carry me to my retirement, and the kids will take over, or I'll flip it to private equity or some strategic purchaser, and then it'll be their problem, in the 10, 15-year horizon. Well, these days, it's not 10 to 15 years, is it? It's 10 to 15 quarters, or 10 to 15 months, or sometimes 10 to 15 weeks, or sometimes it feels like 10 to 15 days,
there's
or
no
even
question.
10 to 15 hours since the last whiplash that we're now having to cope with. So that's why agility, Kim, is so front and center as a competitive advantage, the only competitive advantage really that we can rely upon these days.
So let's, you're talking about a concept of agility, right?
Yeah.
So, we've heard a lot about Agile, we've heard a lot about VUCA, Black Swans, but there's some really unique elements that you just touched on. The everyday, let's talk about the real world leadership aspects, beyond the concepts. How can this really come to life? How do we approach agility through our teams and our peer-powered culture?
Yeah, exactly.
Talk more about the collective intelligent factors that go into all of this. The concept of collective intelligence, CI, nothing new, right?
Yeah.
It's crucial in defining the success of any group or any endeavor, and it's used daily in most organizations, almost naturally.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems like you're approaching something more systematic. You're talking about something more systematic.
Yeah. So, I like to talk about everyday agile leaders, which I learned when I was an everyday agile leader in the real world. So I was lucky enough to start my career working on onshore and offshore oil and gas drilling rigs as a petroleum engineer, and in Europe. I'm English originally, American now, and I was offshore I was on rigs for 300 days and nights, including 6 months offshore, helicopter out, helicopter back. When you're on 24/7, and you'd be on for a week and then off for a week. You sleep if and when you can. And you really learn very quickly how to be agile, not just as an individual, not just as a team, but as an organization, 30, 40, 50 people on an offshore oil and gas drilling rig. And there were 2 company personnel on site. I was the number 2, and somebody called the tool pusher was number 1.
Oh, that's
fascinating. And we had to oversee the whole operation and keep it safe, keep it quality, and keep it productive. And so I learned the hard way in a very real world situation what agility is when there's a very small separation between cause and effect. It possibly could be certainly days, hours, minutes, seconds, moments between cause and effect, with horrendous consequences if you get it wrong. Our challenge in business is that there's a very wide separation in space and time between cause and effect. And so I like to talk about the everyday agile leadership and how we bring those secrets from the real world to shrink that relationship between cause and effect.
You've already got to have a system in place, because you don't have time to react on an oil rig when something goes wrong, right? You've got to know immediately. Yeah,
and you can see from, if you've watched the movie, about the BP Gulf oil spill, Clearwater Horizon, you see how bad it can go and how big and how fast with few second chances.
Yeah, that's the impression that we have in our minds.
Yeah.
We've not been on an oil rig.
Exactly. And so when you have that kind of acute orientation to safety and quality and production, I like to train people to adopt that mindset in business. And because many people in business haven't had those kinds of real world experiences or had that kind of real world training. And so obviously you've got to implant into your business an agility operating system that has an agile strategy piece. It has an agile operations piece. It has an agile infrastructure piece. It has an agile productivity piece, an agile culture piece. And not least of all, an agile mental model piece, which is, do we have the mental agility to keep reframing and reinventing and rethinking about how we look at our business and the lens and the blueprint and the worldview window with which we look at our business, because often that's where our irrelevancy starts to set in. I mean, obviously, you've got all the classic case studies that get overused in business. Go ahead, Kim.
Well, I'm seeing the tie now to where everything is compressed now. Things are happening so fast in our environments. We're used to having more time to react. And everything is just like a train coming at us all of the time. You listed all of the things going on in our outer world that are impacting this need. So this agility thing, this need to build these operating systems that work more quickly is absolutely more relevant than it's ever been. I like this idea of, building a system,
Yeah, so an agility operating system and all of the moving parts, and how does it integrate? How does it align? How do you attune it to the nature of this crazy, crazy topsy-turvy journey that we're on in the VUCA world these days?
Yeah.
The cadence, the rhythm, the pace with which we need to be iterating and adapting is just accelerating all the time. And, I was on the board of a multi-generational family business for 15 years that had a collection of car dealerships. And when you rolled it all up, it was a sizable, multi-$100 million business. And over those 15 years, we went through pretty much everything. We went through the Great Recession. We went through the whole cash for clunkers thing, if you even vaguely remember that. One of the dealerships was a Toyota dealership. We went through the whole Prius crisis with the uncommanded acceleration. And if you remember, the CEO of Toyota was hauled in front of Congress to explain himself. We went through the increasing, digitization of the automotive dealership business with internet sales and Carvana and CarMax and all of these kinds of things. And then, of course, the emergence of electric vehicles and all of that's happening today. And, one of the best stories, frankly, is Toyota. I've driven a Toyota Prius for many years because it works for me. It's kind of a workhorse of a car. It's very low maintenance. It sits at the airport for weeks at a time.
You have to drive a lot of miles too, from where you live into LA and where you work.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you remember, there was a time when Toyota commanded the highly fuel economic hybrid car market. There were times when you would pull up to the traffic lights and you would be surrounded by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Priuses. And now, of course, Toyota completely missed the boat when it came to the electrification and EVs, and now they're trying to catch up. Isn't that
interesting, right?
Yeah. So, that's one example where you can go from the peak to the trough, if you're not careful, in a matter of 3, 5, 10 years with a large corporate. Of course, the opposite story is I was very fortunate to have some personal private time with Alan Mulally, the prior CEO of Ford, who turned around Ford from whatever that was, 2004, I think it was, to 2014, something like that. And he pulled off one of the biggest corporate turnarounds of all time. And in my words, not his, but pretty close to it, he turned Ford from being a collectively unintelligent organization, and that's putting it mildly, right?
Okay.
To a collectively intelligent organization that was fit for purpose and fit for the future. Of course, Ford has subsequently been through all kinds of turbulence, but now you look again, Ford is now back on the leading edge of the electrification EV market, and its share price is peaking. And of course, there are many listeners out there that might think, well, those are great examples of big companies, Mike, but we're a smaller company. We're in more of a startup, scale-up mode. Surely we are naturally agile, aren't we?
Right.
And that is one of the biggest myths of all. It's a mental trap to think that startups and scale-ups are naturally agile. They're categorically not. I've worked with hundreds of them over the years. They are not naturally agile. They are naturally frenetic hair on fire, and seat of the pants. And that is collectively unintelligent, putting it mildly.
So I think so very often it's the CEO, the leader of the company, who is trying to hold the whole company up, and their modality isn't changing, and they're not necessarily learning to tap into truly the collective intelligence of the team to help them build the processes to build their companies.
Yeah. And
just the stories you're telling, I think, resonate with any of us who have been in the business world more than 20 years, 30 years.
And so,
I mean, coming from the payments industry, I had to move. I was always on the innovation side, and moving legacy platforms onto more agile platforms that could do things that the legacy platforms couldn't even dream of doing. And now we have fintech, and you don't even need platforms. You just need APIs. And so this world is just so fascinating, so fun.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit more to us about the concept of how collective intelligence and peers can help us be more agile in this very fast-paced world.
Yeah. So, when you think about an agility operating system and all of the moving parts, when you think about how we as leaders need to show up in that system, generate the peer-powered culture of agility that we want, which is the only advantage we really have these days with any permanence, then we begin to get to the concept of collective intelligence and all of the culture and teamwork elements that have to come together.
Okay.
And I used to run the aerospace division of a British public company that probably nobody's ever heard of, called Spirent PLC, initially in the UK, and then that's what brought me to the States 23 years ago in 1999. And I made some software acquisitions over here, 3 of them in North America, which brought the critical mass of my business. So I ended up over here. So I ended up having a division of high-tech hardware and software aerospace technology companies in a very fast-moving environment, part of a public share price sensitive, company environment, serving, blue chip airlines and original equipment manufacturers like Boeing and Airbus, and of course militaries as well. And so we were in this sort of pressure cooker of having to be agile, where we were doing, very fast moving, innovative, entrepreneurial, technological stuff at the same time as having to be predictably, reliable with our revenue and our profitability to meet the share price sensitivity of the company. Sure. And of course, the quality and safety and delivery standards of a Boeing, not least of all. And so it really became about how do we get our teamwork, our culture, our leadership to really come together to have a sufficient level of collective intelligence to power through that, to overcome that, to be above those demands so that we could supply the collective intelligence needed to be successful. And I've been lucky, Kim, to be in the field of peer groups for 20 years, and I was a leader of 4 different peer groups, 2 CEO groups and 2 key groups. So at any one time, I had 50, 60, 70 members. Over the 15 years, therefore, probably had 200 or 300 members in total across a wide diversity of industries and businesses, from high tech to low tech, local to global, mostly for profit, of course, but also some not for profit, old economy, new economy, and just saw how hard and challenging it is to try to get this sort of collective intelligence of teamwork and culture and leadership to really click. And I was just with a mid-market company, a small to medium-sized enterprise that's very fast growth, very high tech, very global. I was just with them for a few days, facilitating their annual strategic process, and I brought them very quickly to a place within an hour of saying to them, you have become a big, small company. You've grown in your revenue base, but you're still running it like a small company.
You're a small company.
Hair on fire,
Yep.
seat to the pants, frenetic.
There's something so compelling about that.
Right? That is collectively unintelligent, to put it mildly. That is collectively fragile. And
Right.
of course, they're nodding their heads. And I said, and about a year ago, you tried, because you were aware of that, you tried going out and recruiting a big company guy to come in and be the CEO. And unfortunately, what happened there is you flip-flopped to being a small, big company. A whole bunch of big company stuff showed up.
Oh my gosh.
Meetings
I know the story.
meetings like you wouldn't believe, bureaucracy like you wouldn't believe.
Right.
And so you flip-flop to the other side of becoming a small, big company, which is also collectively unintelligent and collectively fragile. So they're kind of looking at me like, well, if that doesn't work and that doesn't work, what's the answer?
Now what works? Yeah.
Of course, I introduced them to, well, there's a third way. It's right down the middle where you have the best of both worlds. And that's where agility lives. That's where collective intelligence lives. And that's where peer power lives, where you can really tap into a peer-powered culture of agility, which at the end of the day is all you have to future-proof yourself with the collective agility that you need.
I love that you place that right down the middle, because down the middle is, in most people's minds, the safe spot, because they start out here, then they overcompensate and go up here, and they're overcompensating because of fear, right? Oh, we did that wrong. Now we got to go all the way over here and do this. And so this sort of middle approach, right? That agility lives there, that agility lives straight down in a place that's practical, that we can leverage as leadership and, as a team. It's so interesting we don't go there first. What drives that behavior?
Yeah, and that's because
we don't know. We don't know how to do it, or
well, it's actually very simple and very complicated at the same time, like most things in life. The middle, of course, is an and proposition. How do I get an and proposition of the best of both worlds? I have the energy of a startup and a scale up, but I have the rigor of a larger company, a corporate. And how do I marry those together to get the best of both worlds as an and proposition? Of course, what we tend to lapse into is an or proposition of thinking it's this or that. It's one or the other. No, it's one and the other. Yeah. And unfortunately, our education system tends to sort of indoctrinate us in the kind of analytical thinking of or thinking, which is right, this or that, and which is wrong. And of course, the real answer is, well, they're both right and they're both wrong. It's an and proposition of both. And this, for me, Kim, is why, if you want to really master collective intelligence so that you can master agility, the best place that you can possibly be, like no doubt many of our listeners, is in a
peer group
form experience.
For sure.
That is really digging deep into how to have collectively intelligent conversations about challenging stuff.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, because, my entry into this business came through being a member for 4 years of an early stage, very early, before fintech was even a word. We were that company. Yeah. And we were doing those things from here to here, because we knew that we needed massive transaction, high-speed transaction processing platforms. How do you get from that to this without being big company? You're small company. You've got to innovate, stay agile. And so by sitting in a peer group and getting the collective intelligence for me of that group helped me bring my ship back to balanced again. Yeah. That's my personal experience. So
yeah. And so, agility is complicated, right? There are many moving parts. You can't, give people the PhD in a 1 hour webinar. but you
No.
can invite them to become
No.
students of agility, and that's really what I do.
Yeah.
And but over my 20 years, and then my 20 years before that in as a leader and CEO in businesses, high-tech businesses, about 5 years ago, I came to a crystallization that I use to sort of cut through all the hype, cut through all the complexity, bring it down to sort of the bottom line. And it's what I call C to C. And I know you've heard me talk about this before. C to C, conversation flow to cash flow. And, Kim, we used to all say, and I'll forgive you still saying this, cash is king. And yet what I spend my time doing is saying to people, well, maybe, but not really. Conversation flow is king. Cash is just a way of keeping score. You see, you show me a company with poor cash flow, I will show you a company with poor conversation flow, a collectively unintelligent conversation flow. They're not talking about the right things at the right way at the right time. I articulate that the definition of conversation flow is also inclusive of actions, because actions are a conversation with reality. If only you'll get into real action sooner, you bring reality into the conversation, letting you know what's working and what's not working. That really is the door to an agile mindset. And that's a longer conversation, but conversation flow to cash flow. And you show me a company with poor cash flow, I'll show you a company with poor conversation flow. And it often doesn't take that long to demonstrate that, because what I would typically ask to do is just say, hey, tell me one of your most pivotal meetings that you have, on a reasonably frequent basis. I don't know, it's your weekly whatever or your monthly whatever. Could I come in and sit in on that? And now I'm going to be a fly on the wall of just how collectively intelligent or not their conversation flow is going to be. And where your conversation flow goes, your cash flow follows.
Well, you call it C to C, and it's so absolutely true. And it comes down to, we are all in this H to H business.
Yeah, that's right. We heard that the other day, didn't we?
Whatever. It's human to human.
Yeah.
So what you're really talking about is what we do inside of a peer group with collective intelligence. Then the CEO, the CFO can take back into their organization and use those same disciplines to gather collective intelligence with their peers. This is what I think I'm hearing you say. So behaviors get to that human to human that open the conversation. Conversation leads to cash flow.
Yeah. And, the reason why I've been so passionate about peer groups for so long is that they really are a workout gym where CEOs and executives and financial executives and other vertical functional areas can come and get limbered up with how to have collectively intelligent conversation flow, from which your collectively intelligent cash flow will follow. And, for the last 20 years, I've really ended up at a triangulation between agility, collective intelligence, and peer forums. And, when I think back over 20 years with the groups that I ran for so many years, and I think about the kinds of conversation flows that occurred in those groups, about the kinds of challenges, opportunities, problems, strategic dilemmas, issues that members brought to those groups in business, professionally, personally, and in life, because it's a very holistic approach. A lot of it really comes down to some of the factors that I encounter all the time when I'm working with members and CEOs and executives and doing kind of retreats like I just did. In a VUCA world, you are the number one problem you face is chaos.
Oh, for sure.
And I explain to people, you do what you do on an oil and gas drilling rig, exactly. But there's a world of difference between two kinds of chaos: disorganized chaos and organized chaos. If you're in disorganized chaos on a drilling rig, it doesn't end well.
Somebody's going to die.
So how do you understand the difference? And I
Right.
think about a lot of the issues that we processed in the peer groups. And it really, a lot of the time, it came down to, hey, you, Mr. or Mrs. Executive or CEO, you are being a source of disorganized chaos. You need to shift gears and become a source of organized chaos. What that means is that you need to be triaging better. In a
Right.
VUCA world,
Right.
right, there is way too much coming at you. You just can't possibly treat all the patients equally all the time. You have to super triage. And so, we'd be asking questions about, what do you really want? No. What do you really, really, really want? And what are the things that you're going to super prioritize in alignment with what you really, really, really want? And put everything else, on a lesser priority. And you seem to have got your priorities inside out, upside down, and back to front. Let's help you straighten that out, and really just help members have a greater sense of direction and orientation to the journey that
Right.
they're on in business, professionally, personally, and in life. And that those are very rich and collectively intelligent conversation flows that lead onwards and upwards to a fulfilling outcome.
Yeah. When you frame it that way, and I think back to my days as a member, and I think to, do I still model that behavior as a leader in this company? Those things were irreplaceable.
Exactly.
Those experiences were irreplaceable, right?
Yeah. And
They are.
it's really interesting because when I'm doing keynote speeches and I'm doing workshops and all of that, and of course I speak virtually for REF globally around agility, and I'll spend whatever amount of time I've got to work with. I'll spend about 2/3 of that time, giving a bit of a sort of flyover conceptually, and then I'll weave around to we get through C to C, conversation flow to cash flow, collective intelligence, all that kind of stuff. And then I arrive at the moment when I say, okay, now do you want to know the number one secret, the number one thing you should work on, the number one, silver bullet to agility? And they're like, yeah, give it to me. And then I say, meetings. And they look at me
Which they think,
with such a look of disappointment on their face.
Yeah.
And of
Not
course,
one more meeting, no.
And so, of course, we have fun with that. And I say, I don't mean average meetings. I don't mean the kind of meetings that most businesses have. I mean agile meetings. And why, of course, are agile meetings at the heart of your agility? Because conversation flow to cash flow is at the heart of your agility. And what is the number one place in which you have your highest stake, most multifunctional, big decision-making conversation flows? Meetings. And of course, in most businesses, if you're not careful, present company excluded, right? Meetings are a bit of a mess. They're not a source of agility. They're a source of fragility. They're not a source of traction.
We get sloppy, I think.
Yeah, they're a source of wheel spin. And
we don't appreciate the time that we're spending in the meeting and the value of our time in that meeting.
Yeah, and so if you go back to one of the biggest case studies of all, in my words, of a turnaround from being collectively unintelligent and just trying to be not mild and polite, collectively dumb, collectively stupid, to being collectively intelligent, one of the biggest turnarounds of all time was Alan Mulally at Ford. And if you read the book, American Icon, how Alan Mulally turned around Ford, in that period of time from, I think it was 2007 to 2014, something like that.
Right.
It's a big book. There's a lot of things in it, but very, very, very clearly is identified that the central cog in the whole wheel of that turnaround was meetings, and how Alan Mulally shifted gears to a different cadence, a different quality, a different quantity of conversation flow because of the way that he pivoted the portfolio of meetings that happened in Ford. And that book clearly says the resulting turnaround of profitability, of cash flow, of market share, of revenue, of share price, all started from the simple step of pivoting meetings, agile meetings, not fragile meetings. And so one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about agility, collective intelligence, and peer forums, peer groups, is because that's where you can learn what a really, really, really agile meeting that generates deep collective intelligence, what that looks like, what it sounds like, and how to facilitate it. And not least of all, as we always say, the core of the core of the core of that is the case, the processing of the problems, the issues, the challenges, the opportunities, and how you can in that 30 minutes, in that 45 minutes, in that 60 minutes, how the magic happens when you reach that sort of what we call level 5 of collective engagement, that gives you level 5 of collective intelligence. Then the magic happens and something is created in that moment that didn't exist 30 minutes before.
Yeah, we all want more of this in our organizations. This, right?
Yeah.
That hockey puck up.
It's a place where CEOs and executives can go to sort of learn how that looks like and sounds like, learn the trade of how to create that themselves back in their organization. Because obviously they're dealing with the same kinds of tangled web of issues back in their organization. And if we're not careful, we're not being as collectively intelligent about all of those that we could be. And so learning those skills.
This idea of level 5, getting to level 5 might be a new concept for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's very powerful. Could you just say?
Yeah, so it's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing in life, how many things we can distill into 3 or 5 or 7.
Right.
We're just one of the things that I really have fallen in love with about REF is this increasingly distinctive, unique, powerful dimension of collective intelligence. And as we'll talk about a bit more, that was something that really caught my attention. And so we're investing a lot of time and energy and invention and creativity and innovation in really sort of productizing collective intelligence.
Because how do you harness it? How do you get it to a level 5, right?
And I think we're going to see some
in front of you, but you have to harness it.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some exciting things emerging, over the next few months, quarters, years. And, any kind of networking, organization, and of course, there's a million of those, any kind of level of consulting or training or coaching, could they claim to be in the business of collective intelligence? Well, yeah, of course, to level 1 or level 2.
Yeah.
But level 3, 4, 5 is a whole different proposition, which doesn't happen by accident typically.
No.
Certainly not when you're in the flow of disorganized chaos and VUCA left, right, and center. It takes a key leadership presence and some facilitation skills and a safe space and the right kinds of culture and core values and principles to unlock that collective intelligence. And at level 5, which is where transcendental, transformational possibilities emerge that didn't exist 30 minutes ago. And all of a sudden, we can see some options, we can see a path, we can see some potential that we didn't see in a really tough situation. And, the best, I saw this time after time after time, Kim, I'm sure you have too, in your work as a forum leader, the best issues, problems, challenges, opportunities, cases that members can bring to a group are those where they truly say, I'm at a loss. I just don't know what to do. I have tried this, that, and the other. I just cannot seem to get traction. I'm spinning my wheels. Please help me.
Yeah.
Now we know it's time to get down to work.
Yeah.
And that's when meetings, whether they're meetings back in your office or whether they're meetings in the form of a peer forum That's when meetings do their best collectively intelligent work. And it's learning those skills and those concepts and those frameworks that I've just become so passionate about over the last 20 years.
This is just such an insightful exchange. So I want to just take a couple more minutes before we let some questions come in, because I think people will have a lot of questions around these concepts.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for sharing your experiences and your stories with us. And we're feeling so fortunate to have you join the team and to be on the team. And tell us a little bit more, because everybody's going to be seeing a lot more of you, hearing more from you. But tell us a little bit of how you came to work with the team.
Yeah. So
thanks. How this all came together.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, so I had a 20-year corporate career, and as you heard, I ended up running the aerospace division of a British public company, which brought me here to the States 23 years ago, and then in '99, and then in 2000, 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, the Nasdaq crashed, the technology boom came to a grinding halt, and then 9/11 happened.
Yeah, I was there.
Exactly, and whilst we had a military division to our aerospace business, we were predominantly commercial aviation. And post 9/11, of course, the commercial aviation industry was, in a bad way. But I was very lucky in that I got my green card 2 months before 9/11, so I had options. And so 20 years ago, in the spring of 2002, I went independent. And I was kind of done doing the corporate thing. I wanted to do my own thing, and I started building my portfolio, and it went very well. And I had a peer group practice in the middle of all of that. And I became, I ran, 500 group meetings. I did 2,000 one-to-ones. I spoke to 400 groups around the world about my specialty topic of agility. But I still had an itch I wanted to scratch, Kim.
I think I found you at that moment in time.
I wanted to go back and run a company again as a real-time agility case study.
Okay.
So I ran into a win-win opportunity where we had a meeting of minds. And in 2018, I actually unplugged from everything that I had going.
Wow.
And from my peer groups and my boards and my clients. And I went back to run a company again. And of course, not least of all because of COVID,
right.
It turned into the agility case study I was looking for ×3, ×10.
Sometimes I pivoted more than what you wish for.
Yeah, I pivoted out of that late last year in October 2021. And I thought, I'm still very passionate, of course, about agility, collective intelligence, peer power. I thought, but I don't want to just jump back into what I was doing before. So I decided, I'm going to step back. I'm going to survey the landscape. And in particular, I'm going to look to see, in a post-COVID world, I'm going to look to see who is it who's on the leading edge of what's next with peer groups. And I came across REF. And what got my attention with REF is that it's a very flexible organization, very blue ocean oriented, doing everything now from physical face-to-face local groups to virtual global groups and everything in between for CEOs, executives, horizontal executive groups of VPs of different functional areas, and vertical executive groups of financial executives, technology executives, marketing executives. So it's a really nice product set and solution set. It's a more time and money efficient model than I've seen before. And I hear many members who've had experience of other alternatives express that they really like the fact that it's a more time and money efficient model. But most importantly, what caught my attention is what we've been talking about for nearly the last hour, which is the idea of collective intelligence and how we are on the leading edge of exploring and inventing and innovating collective intelligence, not just in your forum, but outside of your forum, regionally, nationally, internationally, globally, not just in the meetings, but between the meetings. And that got my attention. And the way that fuels agility along the lines that we've been talking about just got my attention. And one thing led to another. And about 3 months ago, mid 2022, I came on board, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, we are so thrilled to have you. So it's been incredible. And you're taking us to another level. Thank you. So we've got a little more than 10 minutes left. So I really would love to take a few questions in the comment boxes. So have we got any to get started?
Yeah. And, while we're chasing down any questions that we've got, let's have a look-see here. A question I often get asked, of course, is, well, hang on a minute. I've heard of Agile. I've heard of Agile software development. I've heard of Agile project management. Is that what we're talking about here? And doesn't that apply to software companies in particular? In fact, didn't it all start with software companies?
That's where we all go when we think about that word, to be honest with you.
So everybody, no, and no. Let me be crystal clear. It is a common misconception that Agile started with software. 100% wrong. Categorically not. It did not.
Double click on that, because that's really interesting. That's a fact I did not know.
No. It all started with hardware. Back in, not least of all, back in 1986, there was a very famous article in one of the 1986 Harvard Business Reviews, where two authors wrote an article called "The New Product Development Game." And they had studied hardware companies, car manufacturers, photocopier manufacturers, camera manufacturers. And they noticed that they had moved on from the old way of doing product development, which these authors called the relay race approach. It's very long, it's very linear, and we pass the baton, right? That's the traditional way of doing product development, for which we have the master plan Gantt chart, all laid out. And somewhere down here in the bottom right-hand corner is the big bang day where we flick the switch and go live with this thing. Well, as most people on this call probably realize, that often doesn't end very well. So back in 1986, studying hardware companies, they said, we've noticed that hardware companies have moved on from this relay race approach to something new. And they said, it's kind of like rugby. They're passing the ball backwards and forwards amongst themselves, moving down the field concurrently as a unit. And for the first time ever, in that 1986 Harvard Business Review studying hardware companies, they used the rugby analogy of Scrum. And if any of you out there have been around the Agile field at all, you will have come across the phrase Scrum. And you will know that at a 30,000-foot level, to some degree, Agile and Scrum are interchangeable. And obviously, at a ground level, Scrum has a practical day-to-day meeting, daily scrums, weekly scrums, all of that. So it didn't start with software companies. It started with hardware companies. The thing is that software companies glommed onto Agile, while hardware companies were still glomming on to lean. Remember during the 80s and
yes, of course.
The 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, the whole hardware world was so focused on going lean, and the software world went agile. But in the 2010s and now the 2020s, even the hardware world is waking up to the obvious answer that, oh boy, lean is no longer enough in a VUCA world. We also now need to go agile.
Oh man, and do I remember the companies, and and I'm not talking the software or the hardware world. I'm just remembering the brands that we saw disappear in the 90s and early 2000s, with new companies coming in, completely replacing their meaning in the industry. We lost the Tower Records of the world. We lost the major movie companies, and everything went online. And we can't begin to think that in this world things are going to slow down or go any less
Yeah.
dramatic. We have to be
Yeah.
constantly reinventing ourselves. So we need these foundational pieces, or
Exactly.
we're going to become irrelevant. I think
Yeah, and obviously the classic examples of Kodak and Blockbuster and BlackBerry,
oh yeah,
they
Blockbuster was, oh
they
yeah,
they they get overused, and they get oversimplified. By the way, if we're not
oh yeah,
careful, we make those leadership teams sound, like they were bozos, which they clearly weren't. They were very,
no,
very, very smart people who
right,
were very, very, very successful. But unfortunately, they got beaten by a next phase of VUCA,
right,
that they couldn't figure out, big enough, quickly enough, fast enough.
right.
And of course, one of the most recent examples of boom to bust is GE. GE's share price is lingering at a terrible place right now, and GE got kicked out of the Dow Jones Industrial Average that it was in forever. GE is in the process of being broken up. GE, relative to its peak, is in terrible shape, and yet it used to be held up, especially in the Jack Welch era, as an icon of American industry, and now it isn't. It's had its Kodak moment,
It did.
and of course, what we
Right.
want for all of our listeners here and all of our members is that they get to avoid any kind of Kodak moment in their future. It's been great to be here with you, Kim.
Oh, it's been great having you here. Do we have any last minute comments, or how are we doing on the time? We're good. We got a few minutes left that we can use. Your story about GE just kind of gave me the chills, because you just sometimes can't think how a brand that big could take such a hard
Yeah,
hit.
yeah,
Um,
it's a long,
and
complex story.
oh, of course it is. We can't
Yeah,
just say, that's one thing or this or that.
yeah,
But if they can get these concepts harnessed that you're
yeah,
talking about, their
yeah.
leadership team, things will come back together.
Yeah, and so again, we mustn't oversimplify it. We mustn't make them sound like idiots, because clearly they weren't. I mean, GE truly had some of the smartest leaders on the planet,
Yeah.
but somehow or other, they clearly were being collectively unintelligent in some way, shape, or form. Their conversation flow was
Yeah.
not on the trajectory it needed to be on. It was on some kind of downslope, and their cash flow followed it.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to guard against. And so where REF is going with collective intelligence to guard against those kinds of Kodak moments is a great opportunity for members. It's a great opportunity for potential forum leaders all over the world where we're expanding. It's a great opportunity for franchisee partners. Great opportunity for strategic alliances, which we've got some great ones cooking. A great opportunity for speakers, where we invite our speakers in many ways, like members, to have a voice in our ecosystem of our collective intelligence globally. It's just a win-win-win, a great opportunity for everybody, and I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. We always make this recording available to all of our REF members. There's some rich information here. Mike is going to be around. You'll be able to find him for sure. And I want to wish you all have a great Friday. Have a wonderful weekend, and keep exploring the power of collective intelligence, from your boardroom to the community to your home. This is a personal, it's a professional, and it's a business evolution that we're all on together. And we're just so happy to be here with all of you. Mike, thank you. Great job.
Thank you.